Welcome to another edition of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, let's take a look at the year that was and the year ahead with Thomas Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities in Toronto. Merry Christmas, Tom, and I'm sure you've got a lot of views on the past year. So for you, what were the highs and lows of the Canadian economy this past year? Let's start with that.
I think the highs, if I could use that word, is that we came through the year relatively unscathed. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of negative rhetoric. There were surprises geopolitically, clearly the Ukraine being one of them, and the threats vis-a-vis Taiwan. So there's lots of stuff to be concerned about. But what was interesting to me was the resilience of equity markets by and large throughout this whole period of time. It told us several things, I think.
Did that surprise you that the equity markets were so resilient?
Not at all. I was having lunch with a friend of mine today, and I said, I'm an optimist. And one of the reasons I'm an optimist is I noticed that they're richer than pessimists. And I've sort of stuck with that. And not that you look at the world through rose-colored glasses or Pollyanna view of things. An optimist looks for opportunities in adversity or in difficult circumstance. And that's what my job is. And we were able to pilot that. I mean, the fund that I'm responsible for, Urbana Corporation, it was up 10% year to date, which is not bad. You know, as long as we're into double digits, I'm a happy camper.
Right.
So there were lots of things to do. You had to some degree, insulate yourself from a lot of the rhetoric that seems to be going on. There are very interesting themes developing in the world, some good and some not so good. So those are the things you have to look to, that I tend to think strategically, and then I work my way down to the specific investments that I'm going to make.
Gotcha. I mean, obviously, when you look a year ago at this time, interest rates were not the issue that they are now. Was that a surprise to you, or did you see that coming?
No, that was always coming. The interest rates were abnormally low for a long period of time. Those of us with a sense of irony find it quite interesting that the central banks, both Canada and the U.S., are going to fight inflation, which they in fact caused by driving interest rates low, flushing the system with cash, and not putting a brake on government fiscal spending, at least encouraging them to slow that down. So it's quite ironic that they've now got religion and are going the other way. But eventually you knew they were going to do this. The inflationary numbers were building, and not necessarily because of excess demands. They were growing, prices were going because of supply problems. That's why interest rates may or may not be an appropriate tool. They might be okay now. But, you know, for example, oil prices, which underpin anything, energy prices, they were abnormally high as a direct result of government policy, a direct result. So that permeates through. Those are the trucks that drive the groceries to stores, everything else. So a lot of it, and then you had supply chain disruptions as geopolitical things in the world interfered with shipments out of China, et cetera,
Right.
the voting problems. So there were add-on problems to it, but the inflation was generally initially on the supply side.
Right. And I guess it was exacerbated. I mean, energy's obviously there's a lot in energy policy and supply, and a lot of it was, as you say, plus the added uncertainty of Russia, Ukraine, at least in Europe. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody really believed there would be a war in Europe between semi-civilized countries. You know, that's the sort of thing you expect to see happening in other areas of the world. But the concept of an actual invasion of countries so related, but there was a lot going on in the background. There was the coup that replaced the communist government there. There was a lot of hostility, EU possibly joining NATO. Russians felt they had to act, but it's even that has been a surprise. Any fool can start a war. Nobody quite knows how they're going to end up. And I think Mr. Putin has been a bit surprised that this wasn't a simple cakewalk.
Indeed, it's got to be the biggest story of the year for sure. The invasion, and and what has transpired since then. We're going to take a little bit of a break, Tom. I do want to get to 2023 next and your expectations, but we'll leave that after the break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell. He is chairman of Caldwell Securities in Toronto. Tom, it's now the opportunity to look ahead to 2023. What do you see as the biggest economic challenges for the next year?
Well, the biggest economic challenges in the coming year, we don't know. You don't know till they kind of hit you. The interesting thing is, you notice everybody's watching inflation numbers. We had a spark up in the market when inflation numbers seem to be abating somewhat. But I always tell people, if you look ahead, don't get caught in the minutia or the key factors right now. Everybody's been talking about inflation, interest rate, recession. First off, I think when you look about the possibility of recession and investing, just remember, recessions come and go. Inflation is permanent. You must always be investing for inflation. Inflation wasn't 2% when the governments were telling us it was 2%. It was nowhere near that. These are fun with figures as far as these guys go. So in actual fact, inflation is a fact of life. So that means the only way you can hedge against inflation is owning stuff. And the best stuff you could possibly own, at least easiest, is equities in good companies, well-managed, good dividends, strong balance sheets so they can take advantage of adversity by buying up competitors. That's the best hedge against inflation. So as far as I'm concerned, when I look at the world in which I live, that is equities, I'm still optimistic going into next year. Now, as I said earlier in the earlier segment, inflation might be inappropriate to fight it with interest rates because we need to expand capacity in the West. We're shortening our supply lines. We're building capacity. Increased interest rates don't help that. Be that as it may, central banks are notorious for causing business slowdowns and recessions. And there's a difference between a recession and a slowdown. I think we'll probably have a degree of a slowdown. But underneath it all, there's tremendous power in the economy, and there's a lot of money still floating around. Everybody looks at this FTX failure in this cryptocurrency. And I was joking the other day, and I said, the fact that a person with a Harpo Marx hairdo and cargo shorts can attract $3 billion
I know.
shows you how much money there is roaming around looking for homes for it. So there's a lot of money still looking for opportunities. So that leads me to be relatively optimistic on equity markets. Economies are a little bit different, and I think I've mentioned to you before, Tony, that Canada is losing the competition for investment dollars, for talent. We're getting immigrants. That's great, and that's a wonderful thing. Refreshes our country. But we do not have policies that enable us to effectively compete with our biggest competitor, that is America. So Canada is going to have a challenge economically long term, as long as we have a no policy government or a government that's fixated on only one component, i.e. climate change or giving money to people who feel aggrieved. So I think there's a dichotomy there.
Right.
But as far as the U.S. goes, we might get dragged along a little bit in their positivity. And our energy component, which has been under attack, particularly from the feds, it still is a cornerstone of the Canadian economy.
Gotcha.
So that may maintain our dollar to some degree. Optimistic. We might have a slowdown. Interest rates may go a little bit higher, but my gut feel is they're probably reaching the end of this interest rate increase cycle. I think we may not be at the top. We may have a few more increases, but we're pretty close to it. And the economy can accommodate that.
Right.
Because if inflation is 7% or 8% and interest rates are 5%, it's still negative interest rates. That is, it's still cheap to borrow to buy.
Gotcha. We've got about a minute left before the break. Supply chain woes, do you expect those to continue?
I think they're abating. In fact, if I discern anything, America's easing up on their hostility toward China. They seem to be allowing some of these companies to stay listed in the U.S. They seem to be trying to back off the truculent relationships we've had. I don't know whether that's possible or not. But America has learned the lesson that globalization may not be all it's been cracked up to be. I think it's too bad because I think that was helpful. But you're going to see more building in the States to shorten those supply chain lines. They're going to manufacture and build in America or in very friendly countries.
Yeah, it looks like President Biden has certainly signaled that with the CHIPS Act and passing Congress, and he signed that into law. It's already having a big impact on the semiconductor industry, and that will only continue. And same with critical minerals and rare earths and other aspects of the economy. We will continue our conversation, however, after the break. Tom Caldwell, please stand by. We'll be right back. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum with Thomas Caldwell. He is chairman of Caldwell Securities in Toronto. Tom, I want to keep talking about 2023, what's on the horizon. What about the energy sector? Do you see that continuing to grow? I mean, obviously, you've identified one of our issues as Canadians is getting our energy resources to a market. So please comment on that situation.
I don't see any improvement in that area. The mood of government is locked in this climate change, scenario that energy, those hydrocarbons are bad. And, we're going to move over time to more electrification. You see, everybody's jumping on the fact that nuclear fusion, we're seeing a few possibilities there. We're a long way from that. And we are going to be dependent on hydrocarbons. It doesn't matter how rabid an ideologue you are, climate change, we're going to be dependent on quite a period of time. And I think that realization is slowly dawning on people, particularly in Europe with the Ukraine surprise. But I think oil and energy prices are going to increase again. We've had a dip off here, but I think they're going to come back up. I still have investments in the Canadian energy sector, and I feel pretty confident about those positions. I think they'll do better again. It was a very good year last year. I think they will continue to do well. So the delivery of more that's a moot point because everybody seems to be cast in stone in their views, and particularly the feds. And of course, whether it be the indigenous groups or Quebec, they don't want pipelines going across their area. So it does hamper our growth as a country and are helping out with climate change by generating liquid natural gas. So we just can't do that. We're not an investment destination anymore. There's just too much hair on the whole exercise in Canada. So I still think, remember, these energy companies all make money at $50 oil. They all do well at that. And it's about 77 or so today and increasing a little bit.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about the U.S. economy too, Tom? Obviously, there's been a change in the House of Representatives that'll take place in early January. What do you think is going to happen with the U.S. economy, and how is the U.S. Congress going to play into that?
The beauty of the U.S. system, and ours has great advantages in other areas as well, but the beauty with the U.S. system is it does renew itself, or has the capacity to renew itself every couple of years. I think the interim election that just passed, just in November, was quite interesting because on one hand it said we want to see some changes, we want to break on government, but oh, by the way, we're not prepared to go Trumpian all over again. Nobody wants that conflict environment anymore. So there were several messages coming across, and I think it was quite a satisfactory response for more balanced, rational, and competent government going forward. I don't know that Congress can put a brake on a lot of things. The House of Representatives is the one that really helps with the Republicans. The Senate, I see one of the senators now is going to go back as an independent. So it's 50-50, but it's still the Speaker of the Vice President has the casting vote. So they still have a majority in the Senate, but they can't get away with much in the way of, we say, frivolity without the House of Representatives on side. So it does provide a break on a lot of what we have seen there. And society is going through a really interesting exercise. I was thinking about all these protests around the world, Tony. Mm-hmm. There's a common theme to them all. Now, there are different reasons. I mean,
Right.
China for its reasons, Canada for its reasons, United States for its reasons, Russia for its reasons, Tehran for their reasons. But underneath the reasons is the same theme. It's ever intrusive government in people's lives. That's the real thing, whether it be COVID or whatever. People are demanding more freedom, or they're demanding to preserve what freedom they've got, because the pressures we're all under to be politically correct, to say or think or believe or act in a certain way. That goes against human nature. So it's interesting to see the sociological stuff we're going through. And remember, sociological works its way into the economy eventually. So I think we've seen a high watermark of government imposing itself into the freedom of people's lives. So it's just interesting. It's just an observation, not a big theory at this point in time.
No, and obviously there has been a lot of protest in 2022 that has broken out in various places. You mentioned Iran, of course, and China. So yeah, I mean, there's that the common theme is freedom and being able to live one's own life without an authoritarian regime overhead. We're going to take another little break. We'll be back with our guest after that. Please stay with us. And we're back here at Boom Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell. He is chairman of Caldwell Securities in Toronto. Tom, just going a little bit closer to home, housing prices. What do you see on the horizon there?
It really depends on the segment of the market you're looking at. The high-end houses seem to be holding up. Coming back to the point I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of money still roaming around. If you take a look at areas like, say, Forest Hill or Rosedale, there hasn't been a big pullback in houses there, housing prices there. And houses are still being bought at robust prices and then being torn down to build something bigger and more grand. So that component seems to be, at least for the time being, stabilized. The condo market seems to have been easing off. It's a little bit tougher to sell your condo now. And we might have peaked out in that market for a period of time, and you'll probably see pullbacks in that area. Entry-level housing is a little bit different. It probably eased off somewhat, but still, we're talking about 500,000 immigrants coming to Canada. The bulk of those are going to go to Toronto because there's an everything community where you can fit in, feel at home in Toronto. Younger people are saying, well, I can't afford a house. People in their 20s. Well, I was in my 30s when I bought our first house. Most people are. And there's no inalienable right that you should be able to own a house. But so many people, if I look at the generation ahead of me, my mother, when we bought our house, they bought their house, they rented rooms for a while. I mean, there's always ways you can work around. I mean, Airbnb helps a lot of people cover their mortgages these days. So you're seeing a little bit of easing off in the entry-level houses and some of the new houses and in the condos. The big end of the market still seems to have a resilient because there's a lot of money wanting to build a monument to themselves.
Food prices. That's the other big thing on people's agenda. Any relief from that?
Well, it's hard to tell. I've now started shopping. You see, sadly, my wife has had a minor stroke, so now I'm doing the shopping. So I'm coming in cold. I just think this is expensive anyway.
Yeah, sure.
But my cooking skills are pretty basic. It's beans and small steaks and stuff like that.
Sure.
So it's hard for me to really say. But housing, should I say, grocery prices are going to be under pressure for a long, because it is the culmination of so much.
Right.
Population, transportation, energy prices, they all converge. And I know there's pressure on grocers to try to cut margins, but it's like anything. You have to pass on some of the costs that you're getting. And I imagine everybody's belt tightening as best they can. But keep them in housing. But grocery inflation is going to continue for a while. How bad from here? But you just have to reallocate what it is you're eating and how you're eating. And again, in the era I grew up with after the war in the 40s and 50s, people didn't eat as well as they did now. Witness the obesity you see around. So you just have to smarten up on your shopping for a period of time. But I think it will get contained, or you'll have significant outrage maybe a year out from now. By the way, I didn't cover your point. You mentioned the economy next year. The underlying U.S. economy is still quite strong.
Right.
But the area that's got killed was this tech area. That is a social media, that type of thing. That's been really slammed down big time.
And
But those,
crypto, I guess, as well. Yeah.
but you see, crypto is not a currency. Crypto is a security,
Right.
and it's a security based upon the greater fool theory. And you're seeing these things going missing and etc. You're going to have more problems in that area. I've stayed clear away from it. Unless I could sell Tommy Toonies, my own crypto, that would be a great idea. But failing that, I don't see the point. It is based on the greater fool theory.
But tech, we've got about 30 seconds left. Tech generally, you think there's some hope there?
They all come back to Earth. It's like the shiny objects. There was a while when the railroad boom in the 1800s come back to Earth, or airplanes and airlines come back to Earth, or fiber optic cable, global crossing. They all collapse at the end. And same as this. Oh, it's new. It's great. Tremendous valuations. They're coming back to Earth. And there'll be great opportunities in these companies. We are going to do business and conduct social interchange on a totally different basis. And that is where these companies live. They were just too more than fully valued. They're just going to come back to Earth, and you're going to evaluate them like any other company. And they're all in competition with each other. It's not an easy game anymore.
Indeed. Well, Tom Caldwell, that's the end of our program for today. I'll see you in the new year, of course. But thank you very much for sharing your insights with our audience today.
Thank you. Happy New Year and have a great Christmas. All the best.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you. Great to hear from Tom Caldwell as usual. A lot of grist for the mill there for 2023 especially. We'll see how that goes. We'll talk to him again in January. Thanks for watching today.